Hi, everyone. I think everyone's grabbed their waters. Please have a seat. Take your seat. We're about to get started. And it's going to be a fun ride for at least an hour and something. So we're going to get started with a conversation about what it actually takes to innovate and build capabilities to drive and enable technology innovation. And we're talking about national innovation systems playing a very key role in all of this, in driving, enabling, and sustaining innovation to achieve those Paris Agreement goals. We're going to be talking a little bit about the key pillars of innovation systems. We're going to talk about the role of governments, private sector, philanthropy, universities, the financial sector, and the role of incubators, accelerators, and most importantly, in my opinion, international collaborations when it comes to research and development. How do we go beyond siloed thinking? We're all guilty of it to an extent. How do we deliver on integrated, on-the-ground solutions, showcase examples of sustainable, innovative solutions? That's pretty much going to be the crux of the conversation across the panel today. But before we get started, I'd like to invite back up Daniele Violetti from the UNFCCC to give us his keynote to get us started on this conversation.
Thank you, and hello again. Well, first of all, I have already said a few words on the importance of technology innovation in the way we need to go for meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. So now I'm very pleased to open the first event of the ARC Clean Tech Innovation Festival here in Remscheid. And I would like to start with asking ourselves one question. And the question is, what does it take to drive innovation? This is the question that the panelists will, of course, address soon and set the scene for the numerous discussion to follow today and in the next day. But with these 50 panelists that are coming here and in this industrial town, will focus on how to drive innovation for key clean tech and high ambition impact sectors, such as cement, aviation, or long duration energy storage. So in the transformation to a low carbon and climate resilient world that we need for achieve a real sustainable development, technology innovation is critical. It plays a key role, and a role that the Paris Agreement makes it very clear in Article 10, and I'll read the paragraph relating to this. Accelerating, encouraging, and enabling innovation is critical for an effective long-term global response to climate change and promoting economic growth and sustainable development. So that's the guiding principle. Not that we needed the Paris Agreement per se, but this is the framework we are taking action in this context. On top of that, the recently published 6th assessment report by IPCC further recognize the role that innovation has in driving those transformational changes required to meet the global goals for climate and sustainable development. In its chapter on innovation, technology, development and transfer, the IPCC underlined that technology development is not a linear process. On the contrary, it is a systemic exercise that involves a range of actors that interact with each other in order to achieve specific objectives, be it the production of knowledge or the development of new products. All this embedded in an institutional context that governs the behavior of the actors and interactions among them. The IPCC report brings us at the heart of the discussion of today. So it indicates innovation systems as the way to underpin the process of successful deployment of new and improved technologies. And it confirms as well the findings of the past work of the UNFCCC Technology Executive Committee on the same topic. I mentioned the work of the tech before in my opening, because that's the policy side that comes in the climate change process and helping drive work on technology development and transfer. So as the country's technological capacities are determined in part by the effectiveness of its national system of innovation, this network of actors, institutional context and linkages that constitute the core of a national system of innovation play a central role in supporting each country's efforts to enhance action on climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. It also helps countries to meet other development challenges and add value to its national economy. So it's easy to say it's a win-win situation. It's actually very true, and the synergies that you can get out of this are much more than the usual individual actions. So the panelists today will explore all these as the key pillars of innovation systems. They will discuss the role of governments, the private sector, and universities. I started this with one question: what does it take to drive innovation? And at this point I would like to close with another one. What does it take to go beyond silos and departmental thinking and deliver integrated on-the-ground technology solutions? The Glasgow Climate Pact, adopted at COP26, recognized the importance of international collaboration on innovative climate action, including technological advancements across actors and society, sectors, region, in contributing to progress towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. So we are here for this. We are here to further explore. And of course, the discussion, I'm sure, is going to be quite exciting, because this is the place where we can really look at solutions that will take us where we need to be. So I wish you a successful discussion, and I thank you for now. Thank you.
Very much. If I can get you to join me amongst the crowd, I'm going to invite Peter up on stage, because Peter will be leading this conversation's technical aspects. So if I can get you to take a seat on stage. He is, of course, the founder and CEO of FCA, if he needed any introduction. Did it formally. Let me also introduce you to our other panelists. Ben Santhouse joins us. He is an MSc Energy Systems student at Oxford University. Ben's research primarily focuses on negative emission technologies and hydrogen. Ben, if I could get you to join us on stage. Martina Lyons is Associate Program Officer at IRENA. She works at the Innovation Technology Center in the US and then in Germany, where she also works on 3 work streams, tracking the impact of innovation, decarbonization pathways for the end-use industry sectors, and the critical materials for the energy transition. Did I get that right? Perfect. Let's also introduce to you Dietram Oppelt. He is Managing Director of the climate consultancy HEAT, but today he joins us in his role not just as a member of the UNFCCC's Technology Executive Committee, or TEC. He's also representing here today as the National Designated Entity, or the NDE, for Germany. Also joining us is Eduardo Noboa. Eduardo is Senior Climate Change Specialist at the Bmw Foundation and Scientific Advisor in Sustainable Urban Transitions at the University of Hamburg. Eduardo wears way too many hats. He also is the former NDE for Ecuador. He's a former tech for Latin America and the Caribbean. He's here as the voice of philanthropy, civil society, private sector, and I'm guessing policy as well. I don't know. So if you have any questions from any field, lob it at him. I think you can blame him for letting me know that bit. Let's kick this off in the most simplistic way I can. Dietram, your job just got very, very interesting. This is a country that is now looking at accelerating all that it can in terms of its energy usage. For obvious reasons, we have an ongoing war. The conversations maybe on policy circles may have deviated slightly because of the energy crisis that we're facing, but this is opportunity, isn't it? Tell us what you're doing as an NDE for Germany.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And first of all, I hope we don't deviate much. I mean, I think Germany still remains firmly committed to its climate targets. And as we all know from UNFCCC, what we all do as industrialized countries, it's not enough, so we have to do more. So I think we cannot backtrack. I mean, we have to respond to the current situation and all this, but I think we cannot focus on problems we have today for having more problems tomorrow. Yeah? So I think that's very important. Just on what we do as NDE Germany, so we support basically the NDE Germany is under the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. And we support the ministry which is responsible for all the support work also for the UNFCCC on technology, in the technology mechanism, and I'm tech member of the Technology Executive Committee, so this is one of the activities, and other activities also we promote active transfer of and standards on technology, and for example, I'm also chairing the Committee for Standards under the Industrial Deep Decarbonization Initiative, which is UNIDO is the secretary, Germany is a member, UK is a member, India is a member, and Canada. And here we drive standards for the deep decarbonization of heavy industries, steel and cement, with a focus. So these are some activities which we do. Yeah.
I'm going to come back to that because there's so much to talk about in terms of regulation. I know, Peter, you'll go further deeper into that. But Martina, lay the groundwork out for us as to the focus of IRENA now. What are you working on? What are the biggest challenges that you're facing in this environment?
Thank you. Is it working?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you for inviting us. So IRENA is international intergovernmental organization. It stands for International Renewable Energy Agency, and what we do, we are helping our members, which are 167 countries around the world, plus another 17 countries which are in accession, and we are helping them with the energy transition. And what is the biggest challenge right now is the net zero goal, which a lot of countries, but also a lot of companies are trying to reach. They committed, and now they're trying to find a way how to do it. And what we are learning from our members is that they haven't yet fully internalized what that net zero goal really means. So what it means, it actually means a lot of things. And it means that we need to be very consistent. And this is what we are trying to do with our work and in our dialogue, that we need to focus really on that goal. And all our activities had to lead us there. And we shouldn't get too much distraction from all these partially important, partially committing things. And why such a big focus? It's because we are running out of time. And just to the pace and the scale of that net zero transition or the energy transition is really daunting. Just to give you a couple of numbers, and this is also applicable to end-use sector, to hard-to-abate sectors. So between now and 2050, we need to increase the deployment of renewable 10 times, and we need to increase production of hydrogen 5 times, and sustainable biomass supply 3 times. So it is really daunting. So when it comes to innovation, what we are learning, we cannot let it emerge gradually. We really need to force it, and that was also the message from the very beginning, from the video. And it's great that we have this discussion here, because innovation is really important, because it brings all the solutions which can be deployed, and this is what is also part of our work.
I think I want to come back to you on a couple of questions that you and I were talking about misconceptions, but I want to come back to you on that. Ben, before I come to you, I just want to ask you all, this is a conversation between all of us. We all are here to talk about this. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions pretty much off the bat. So when you do, raise your hand so I can catch your eye, because I'm also the official mic runner today. Introduce yourself, the name of your organization, and a very quick question and who you're addressing it to. So after we allow everyone to introduce themselves, that's when I open it up to questions, and then Peter will continue the conversation in the same vein. So Ben, sorry, I needed to say that before I came to you. The interesting part of you being here is pretty much everyone's represented, and you represent the student body and the student community. You are here, I understand, on behalf of UNGO, the UNFCCC's youth constituency, but we increasingly, I was at COP26, and it was the most active that I've seen young people, but the activism tends to be less oriented towards innovation. What's going on there? How do we change that? And how do we get students more involved on the innovation side and actually driving the innovation, that while we appreciate the activism, we need real solutions?
Those are some very big questions, and I'd be very happy
Always give it to the student.
Yeah, no, I'd be very happy to discuss them throughout this panel discussion. I think when we look at this, you're right. Most young people right now, when it comes to climate, are engaged from the activist perspective. They're demanding change, they're upset with current leadership, and they often lack trust, which is an essential element of national innovation systems, in governments and leadership. What we're trying to do, and what the organizations that I'm working with are trying to do, is change that and actually be the change that young people want to see. And that breaks down into two categories. There's the hardware side of things, in terms of providing networks and diffusion of technology and funding as well for actual hardware innovation and clean tech solutions. Because ultimately, when it comes to most of the hard-to-abate sectors, it will be my generation, realistically, that will be dealing with significant negative emissions in the second half of this century, and also potentially with things like aviation as well. Now, the second side of things is diffusion of knowledge. And I think it's important to remember when we look at clean tech and the energy transition today, that the current technological revolution that we're seeing is not one that is driven purely by economics. It is also driven by policy and engagement. And that's quite different to previous technological changes. Now, because of that, it's important that we move away from this idea of information deficit, being able to tell people, if you inform the masses, then they will be able to then understand what's going on, to an active participation model. And that's what we're trying to do with young people and with the UNFCCC.
Thank you for that, Ben. Eduardo, you're wearing so many hats. Let me ask you to bridge the two. How does the private sector, well, bridge the three. How does the private sector, philanthropy, and your experiences with the NDEs work together? And how do we get these national innovation systems really working for the solution rather than just being acronyms that we can throw about?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. This is my first time in Remscheid. I didn't know it has tropical weather. Remembers me my hometown. And yeah, thank you for the question. First of all, say that I'm working now for the Bmw Foundation, which is a corporate foundation founded by the BMW Group. And we are basically promoting responsible leadership to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement. And by saying that, what we are doing is developing programs like the Rise Cities program, where I'm working, which is a program that is basically promoting these innovation platforms. So what we are doing is articulating several stakeholders from different sectors, from academia, from government, from the civil society and the business sector, in order to create those spaces of trust, spaces of mutual learning, where these actors can start collaborating. So the idea is that we think one of our assumptions for the transformation towards a more regenerative future is that we need ecosystems of collaboration. And trust is one of these main ingredients. So for that, we are creating those spaces where we are promoting and stimulating this collaboration, where these different stakeholders with different views, different perspectives start to have a common understanding of what are the key problems that we have to address in order to solve these wicked problems. And this is the first phase of this innovation supply chain, so to say. So first we have to have this common understanding of the problems, to have this ability to anticipate to the future together. So these are certain capacities that we are stimulating, because actually what we are lacking is more dialogue. We are lacking this ability to communicate and integrate the perspectives and knowledge from different sectors and individuals into one single mental model where we can drive lately innovation. Of course, this is not everything, but this is the beginning of a process of finding solutions that then will have to have other ingredients such as financial mechanisms and in other aspects.
Oh, and then we get technical, right? Peter,
Shall we?
on that
Yes,
note,
I think we
let's
should.
get technical.
Now let's go to specifics. How can we drive innovation harder? That's the question. I have an example for you. Last year we were able to collaborate with ITIF, attended a panel. It's a US foundation. They do this global energy report every 2 years, or in a certain time frames, and they evaluate the success of innovation systems, national innovation systems. And while, of course, energy innovation as such is global, the targets usually are set at the national level. And they found out again and again that it's a very slow-moving kind of business innovation. So the top rankings amongst the nations, amongst the countries, hardly ever changes. It's just one spot up, one spot down. They rank them from 1 to whatever, 30. Probably you know all this. You know the report. But the question I would ask myself, and I would like to ask this to Martina first, is which countries, because you work as IRENA with almost all countries, or relevant countries, that take developments on driving innovation, which do best and how do they proceed? I mean, we know the top ranking countries, of course, in these lists. Maybe you want to mention an example or two, but what's your general impression? Which countries perform best? What's the formula, the recipe?
So, from our experience, what we noticed is that countries who collaborate and communicate and lead dialogues with others do perform better. Those which put money into RD&D or R&E, they do perform better. So they found ways from their budget to support that. And also lately, we are seeing also those who started thinking about ways how to track that innovation, how they can learn from past successes and failures. So how to collect data which can inform them their future decisions. So it's collaboration, dialogue, money, and understanding what happened in the past.
So a clear vision of where targets need to be allocated and how they shall be pursued.
Indeed.
I'd like to take the debate to Germany briefly. I'm sorry, you're now representing Germany and its deficits in driving innovation in the digital space, for example. We're seeing it. You don't have to comment on this, but I would like to get your advice or your opinion on what you expect to be or what you believe to be the key points that would need to change in the German system. There's a lot of things have been achieved in Germany, of course. We had the renewable feed-in tariffs. We have all these things that have driven global development, but there are some things that are lagging behind. Which kind of targets are lagging, or why do some things not work in Germany?
First of all, I would say Germany is actually not doing so bad. I mean, as a big industrialized country, we are the first country which has a climate neutrality target of 2045. So we are 5 years ahead. I think the youth has played an important role for this, and I fully agree. Targets are absolutely are important, yeah? And we have like Finland or other countries which are even faster in their climate neutrality targets, and we have 120 countries now which have committed climate neutrality, and it's absolutely key. But then we have this implementation gap, yeah? Which is also IPCC talks a lot about it. It's from what we have committed to actually what we do, yeah? And we know there is always problems. There is Corona, there is Ukraine, and we have to stick, and we have to make these targets work and need to implement it. And I think in climate, I think in Germany actually the mechanism is quite good. So we have a governance mechanism. We have like an independent commission which basically looks if we meet our targets on an annual basis. The parliament has to respond to it. If we don't meet the targets, then we have to improve. And I think we are not yet on the track, basically meeting our targets because of problems we have. And we have 2030 targets, but I think Germany is committed to it. And we have to, so we need to relentlessly keep on these mechanisms checking every year, and I would say this is absolutely essential, not only for Germany, but globally for all the countries. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a very good defense, if you like to call it that, because at these levels, the levels you were mentioning, Germany in fact is doing pretty well. But I would like to engage the private side view, or at least Eduardo with his experience in this field and the Bmw Foundation, because I see some founders in the audience, some people who run companies, and some of them are in the digital space. And Dietram, what I was mentioning, what I was referring to is, of course, the small meter rollout. These things in Germany, all this handling options of more digital energy markets, adapting the whole market design. Because as everyone in the room knows, we're in a more general transition, moving away from demand following power production, for example, to supply following consumption, when the sun shines and the wind blows and so forth. And some things are just not moving. So, Eduardo, you've worked in many countries, you're now working for a German foundation. If you compare the locations and the kind of employers you've had and the challenges you've taken on, what's your general view on when do countries perform best on these things? When do they actually get things done? So they have, as Dietram was pointing out, certain targets. There's an overall strategy until 2045, for example, but then there's these specifics. So for example, let's stick with it. We need to get the smart meters into the houses, and it just doesn't work in Germany. So which countries perform best on these things? What's your take on that?
That's a very, very good question. First of all, I would like to say that when we say national innovation systems, we are already putting some borders to the innovation. We are saying national. And I believe innovation nowadays doesn't have any geographical borders. And first of all, we have to understand the scale where innovation is happening. No? And now we cannot say it is happening in cities, but it's happening in communities. And sometimes digital communities distributed in different parts of the world or different parts of the country. So these national innovation systems that should work, they are considering this distributed collaborative work among different individuals that are contributing to this. So in that sense, I believe that national innovation systems that are successful, they are connecting to the global landscape in an effective way. So they are able to transfer and to mobilize resources also from the international landscape. And at the same time, they are able to organize multi-sectoral platforms within the regime where they have to break with this formal institutionality. No? And they have to start to create networks that collaborate outside of the formal institutionality and that are more sustainable than in a governmental period. So they can actually, they have a lifespan bigger than the 4 or 5 years of a presidency. And at the same time, the best, I think, innovation systems are the ones that are creating these protected spaces for the niche level where these innovations are happening. So how to protect those niche spaces from the regime vested interests that don't let them evolve. No? And this is, I think the success of such an innovation system is to combine these 3 levels, the niche level, the regime innovation, and this landscape level.
Thank you. Opening this up.
I think Martina wanted to come in on a question that would follow up then. There are misconceptions about what innovation actually then therefore is, and that sometimes stalls progress.
Yeah, indeed, and they're not universally true, those misconceptions we are seeing, but they do more often that it's desirable. And one of them is the perception what innovation is. And very often, a lot of decision makers, they see, and also wider public, they see innovation as this breakthrough invention, which is completely new and exciting. And we need to correct a little bit that perception, because when we are going to reach the net zero, when we are looking on our 1.5 degree scenario at IRENA, we are already looking at technology which exists today, or solutions. They might not be reliable, they might be expensive, but they're already here. And what we need to do, we need to really make them work and deploy these implementation gaps. And so this is one of the misconceptions. Another one is this value of death. So it kind of, it's not the most helpful term, what we get to see, because it kind of implies that there is just one thing to fix, like this one value of death. But what we are seeing, there are a lot of them. They differ in their context, in their nature. So what we are trying to communicate to our policymakers is that they need to be really flexible, and they need to create a support mechanism, regulatory, financial, whatever, which will help to bridge all those different value of death. And then another misconception or confusion or something, it was also part of the keynote speech, is this linear way of innovation. And this is becoming problematic, because we are using all these terms, we are using them as well, and they are helping our work, but we shouldn't stick to them as some Bible. And these are, for example, technology readiness levels. So it goes from basic applied research development up to the market maturation. So there is this linear way, but we know how innovation works. There are a lot of turns and circling back and learning. So we again need to explain policymakers that all these spin-offs and all these turns can bring new innovation, and they are not at fault, and that the support system has to understand that and persist throughout this. And then the first misconception is, what we get to see is that we see technological innovation in isolation. We look on generation technology, solar, wind, but let's put just solar, wind on our roofs. How far do we get if we don't have this systemic innovation, which was also mentioned in our in the keynote speech? And we spent actually a lot of times at IRENA looking particularly at that systemic innovation. And we started with power sector, because that's the one which made the biggest progress, and now we are looking into hard to abate sectors. And what we did, we identified 30 innovations around the world, which are real, they are deployed, they are able to be replicated around the world, and we put them into 4 different dimensions or categories. And when we connect those categories, we get this system which allows this technology, these generation technologies to strive. And those dimensions are business models, they are enabling technologies, digitalization, smart meters, batteries, smart EV charging, and so on. It's also market design, which means all these wholesale and it's about market and regulatory part, and then it's also about systemic operation. So we need distributed and transmission system operators also to communicate and help those distributed energy resources, for example, or mostly to help to benefit the whole system. So these are 4. There are definitely more, but these are the 4 we are trying to address in our work. Because if we manage that, a lot of innovation we are seeing, they can create a real solution, and they can start being deployed faster.
Thank you, Martina. I think, mentioning the valleys of death, this is something, Täler des Todes in German, for those who don't know the term from the tech development. That's something where also, in our point, as you know, we're collaborating in research consortia and so forth, and we've always argued that there's more than one, there's several on the way in the innovation stages until a tech reaches the mass dissemination, and there's so many objectives and hurdles in the way. I'd like to come back to Ben once more, because I'd like to make the case for the youth movements. Without the youth movements, we wouldn't be at all where we're now in terms of the debate. But I would like to touch upon a point Maitri has made. A lot of, and I'm not addressing you in person, but a lot of these narratives circle around, of course, demanding more action, which is very important, but also sometimes it's the innovation component, of course, is hard to integrate into this discourse, especially the younger the people get, because they don't have access to such a complex concept as innovation. But do you see a potential there? Do you see in your generation, and maybe those people a little younger, 5 years younger, do they see, hey, we really need to develop these techs, and it takes a long time, and there's so many obstacles to be overcome, as Eduardo said. There's like the system that sticks, of course, the placeholders, those who are the market leaders, of course, don't want to give up their terrain. What's your take on that?
Yeah, completely agree with that in general. And I would say that when it comes to people of my age, of my generation, the education system has probably, in the UK at least, has probably failed to provide the knowledge and training needed to actively participate in innovation systems. And at this point, we're now playing catch up to then actively be able to participate in them. That said, There are examples of this where it's changing. So there's an example, for example, in Estonia called Dietram, and Estonia is a country that is blessed with a high level of public trust, which obviously helps the dialogue and engagement between youth and government, where they have been providing scientific method training and impact assessment training, as well as technical training for the hardware component of innovation systems. And that's going on from 11 to 19-year-olds. There's a similar system in France called Envidager, which was set up in 2010 and has been very successful. Again, mostly targeted at high school students. And I think the challenge here is whether you can bring that idea, that concept of innovation before the university stage into the high schools. Because there's also a problem with the universities in that, yes, they are key stakeholders, critical stakeholders when it comes to R&D, but they're also gatekeepers. They're gatekeepers to innovation. And in many countries, much of the innovation system, particularly the innovation system funding, is directed through the universities. If you are a young person and you are not in university in most Western European countries, you will struggle to be able to access the financial capital and the technical knowledge and the networks required to be active participants. How we go about changing that is difficult, but in my view, it needs to start at high school rather than the university itself.
Thank you. I would like, before giving it to the audience, I would like to sort of stimulate one open question. Maybe Dietram, you want to start. But as Martina has pointed out, and as you all know, it's very hard in certain sectors. The sectors, for example, we're discussing at this festival, where the tech development takes very long. Innovation stages are sometimes, it's capital intensive, it's hardware, it takes decades to get it developed. What needs to change? Because so much needs to change right now at the same time. Like the whole, as we spoke about it, it's the whole market design, because the way we consume, produce, and use energy completely changes. But at the same time, we have, like, for example, cement, 100 years old technology, very emissions intensive. So what your meta view on innovation systems, please feel free to reply whoever wants. How can we handle this best? How can we make sure these innovators make it into the mass market?
I think maybe if I can start. So I think first of all, we don't have decades. So, if you read the IPCC report, the remaining carbon budget meeting the 1.5 target is, if you take a 60% chance, then it's 400 gigatons. Yeah? And if we just, for example, look at buildings, because of the growing population, we are going to double the number of buildings in the world in the next 30 years. Yeah? And if you just look at the embedded carbon in the buildings, in the materials, this will eat up almost the entire carbon budget remaining just for 1.5 target. Yeah? And 60% of the buildings is cement and steel, of the embedded carbon. So we need to change now. We don't have decades.
They used to take decades.
And
so what can we do to change it?
So we need, like Sweden, for example. Sweden has now a target, embedded carbon target for new buildings. So there's a limit. And then the steel manufacturers and the cement manufacturers, they know what kind of materials they have to deliver, or it is wood instead of cement. So we have to just rethink the frame.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other ideas on that? Eduardo?
I can add on
Shoot
that.
it out.
Well, I think we need strong policy push. We need strong regulations, a social revolution. So we need a civil society engaged and technological disruption. So we are lacking narratives here. We need to think out of the box. And for that, we need actually strong incentives related to the policy push, incentives from the regulatory entities to the business sector, and from the business sector to the consumer as well, as a chain of incentives. We need financial mechanisms that include philanthropists in the beginning of the risk taking, and then we need impact investors and venture capitalists, and we have to take risks accordingly. And finally, we need to identify those innovative leaders, because actually we don't have time now to educate all the population.
Sure.
So we need to identify the strong communities and innovative leaders and support them.
And start early, I guess. Thank you, Eduardo. You want to add something, Martina? Or go ahead. And then
It's hard to add. It's true. Like it needs every part of the society or the decision makers, youth. Everybody has to be connected. There has to be dialogue between them. They need to understand who is doing what, where are they, what are the barriers, so they can fix it together somehow. And also a little bit innovative way of how we run some of the businesses. Like we are, just one example, maybe just to add something. We are, for example, working on steel industry, and what we were looking at is whether it makes sense to decouple iron and steel production. Whether we can bring iron production, which is very polluting, to countries which has abundant and low-cost electricity, and they can produce iron clean, so it will have the global carbon budget, and then import the iron to the steel factories, which can still make profit from finalizing, refining the product, steel product, and sell them. We are still exploring that, but we are looking on these kind of solutions and what makes sense, basically. Yeah.
go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I completely agree with the remarks from the panelists, but I do think it's important to remember that when it comes to clean technologies, we often go in with the assumption that consumers are going to be rational and are going to recognize the benefits of clean technologies. Now, that may be the case for a large corporate as an end consumer that can actually balance the environmental impacts or could even look at the long-term savings that may be achieved through more efficient lighting or insulation. When it comes to individual household consumers, it's difficult, and we need an alternative approach to be able to communicate the benefits of clean technologies. And what we haven't touched upon thus far, obviously, is carbon pricing, the ETS, and it is important, yes, that that's high enough to be able to reflect the environmental externality, but the big thing currently is that its scope is far too limited. We talked about embodied carbon within buildings. Until we have a wide scoping carbon price, the true benefits of clean technologies are unlikely to be able to be realized, and it's only once we have both a high enough price and a broad enough scope that we're probably going to be able to get to a stage where we can actually accelerate that technological revolution.
Maitri, I think we're getting there. It's the kind of specific demands we're getting from the panel here, which is
Ben
great.
you know what Ben is echoing? Ben is echoing pretty much every CEO I spoke to at COP26. So that carbon pricing is what they want to be able to invest.
Well,
Let's open it up to all of you. Any questions, comments from the room? If you have any to address to our panel, it's a great way to kick off whatever conversations you'll be having.
yes.
Yeah. We're
People
live,
online cannot
we're
hear
live
you.
Quick introduction. Hello, my name's Anouk Kendall. I'm with Decentralized Energy Canada. Fabulous discussion. And I'm going to hone in on the pinch point. It's absolutely what we need. People need to feel uncomfortable, too uncomfortable to not make the decision. So sometimes my head goes to, banning garbage or making sure that we've got penalties for wastage. So is there a regulatory comment on this, or what do we have to, what's it called? It's not make people do it, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Who wants to take that?
Dietram.
I mean, I think there is a regulatory answer to that. For example, if you look at the garbage problem, I think is a very nice case. So like in Germany, landfilling is forbidden. Yeah. So basically, you can't landfill anymore. That forces you basically to recycle. Yeah. So and then to collect the things. I mean, first to avoid, because if there's a price for waste, then you don't waste. Then you need to recycle. And you need to avoid. Yeah? And if you look at Africa, actually more than 50% is just wild dumps, and then if it's good, then it's a sanitary landfill. Yeah? And things are just wasted, and people don't have the framework basically to address it. the political will is not there, and then basically there is also industry cannot invest into it. So you have to have the framework. I think that's very important. Yeah.
Anyone else want to make a comment on that? Any more? Yep.
Thank you. My name is Daniele. I come from Nigeria. I work for Lafarge Cement. Maria talked about sustainable biomass supply. Because when you are looking at energy transition, I mean, biomass is part of the material we're looking at. But the great challenge today now is that, I mean, we are all trying to purchase biomass from the market. What are we really doing to make sure that this material is increasing and is available? I mean, I'll give you an example. In one of our plants in East Africa, when we started looking at energy from waste transition, you know, to reduce use of coal, we look at biomass. Then they were using coffee. One of the things we have to do is that the material is coming from about 500 kilometers to where our plant is. And we have to support the farmers with a lot of seedling, about 11 million seedlings, to bring the material to about 200 kilometers to the plant. And with this, we were able to run it sustainably. But what I've seen today so far is that a lot of companies are trying to buy biomass in the market, and I can't see the investment from anywhere. So it means we will get to a level where a lot of companies will invest to believe that they have the biomass volume, and all of a sudden, they discover this material is not there. So to me, what are we doing to make sure that this material will be available when it's needed? Thank you.
Who wants to take that? Ben and Martina?
Sure. So I've done a bit of work previously looking at cocoa husks as a potential source of biowaste in Sierra Leone, and looking at community models to be able to actually foster that innovation. It is quite a significant challenge where you don't necessarily have easy access to, this comes back to information deficit at the end of the day. And this is a running theme throughout the whole panel and throughout the whole, I expect throughout the next 2 days as well. Until you bridge that information gap, it's going to be very difficult to be able to connect the relevant stakeholders to one another. But the other thing that I would say when it comes to biomass in particular is that there is a risk when it comes to clean technologies that, depending on the practices, depending on the methods, that has adverse consequences. In Europe, and particularly in Germany and in the UK, we saw, if we go back 15, 20 years, a big push towards diesel cars as a solution to reduce emissions. That had very adverse consequences on, at the end of the day, on health when it came to nitrous oxide particulates. And a similar concern today now is being made around biomass when it comes to, again, particulate pollution and public health. So when we look at national innovation systems, I think it is important to remember not to be siloed purely from a climate perspective, but to consider the wider socioeconomic implications of any technology that we are to adopt.
And just a small thing to maybe add, the biomass is not considered by every country. Some countries, such as India, are creating a good infrastructure to harvest it and use it for their industry, but it is really not for, I guess, for everyone. But it does need information exchange, it does need infrastructure, it needs some regulatory framework to help. So there is not also like the food supply and the use, and are we targeting only sustainable biomass? There is also a big discussion about what sustainable biomass is around the world, and there is a lot of disagreement between continents. So it is a topic by itself, I would say. Yeah.
Do we have a session on biomass, Peter?
We don't have one, but maybe if we do something like this again.
I think we will include it. Question here. Very quickly, because we're running out of time.
Georg Kopiela from German Watch. I'm a bit skeptical about considering carbon pricing as the main solution. I had a bit of the feeling that this was put forward. While I agree that it's a really essential part, a lot of technologies, they won't reach their break-even point kind of purely by a rising carbon price. We might need to get up to somewhere above 200 euro per ton for some of those things to become economically attractive. And even then, in some aspects, we will have the issue of we need a vast coordination about via a lot of different actors to get this done. So I think we still need additional parts in it that bridge this gap, like the CCFDs and so on, but also that this initial risk of kind of risking the leap to go into these technologies before securing the large-term financing and large-term buffering of the OPEX there. And I think right there it would be a really interesting part to hear your opinion about how to bridge that and how to mitigate those risks.
Who'd like to take that?
Just, I fully agree. I think pricing is extremely important, but it's not the whole equation. And sometimes, we just need signals. Yeah, like for example, there's a gas, a greenhouse gas, SF6, which is used in transformers, and this has a GWP of 25,200. And there is now, there are wonderful new innovative companies, also from Germany, Siemens, or also others, smaller startups. And they do a technology which is, has zero carbon impact, and this technology is there. Yeah? And so, and the point where you have alternative technologies, you just don't need a gas which has a climate pollution of 25,200. Yeah, and the carbon price will not do the trick because you just need a little bit, and the cost in terms of the overall plant cost is just marginal, so it will not change the system if you just have like a general carbon price. And so for this kind of cases, I think we just need a ban. Yeah? So and it's just much more effective, and there are many more examples like that. So I think we need a mixture between regulatory and carbon pricing. Yeah, and where alternatives are there. And we don't need fossil fuel or high polluting industries anymore, just ban them.
Ban them. Eduardo.
Yeah, maybe to complement there, I absolutely agree that carbon taxing and carbon pricing is not the only solution, but is a package of different regulations that we need. But basically, what I wanted to add here is that at the city level, we need to have certain norms and regulations about the design, the urban design of the cities, for example. And we are forgetting that the most advanced tech is basically nature. No, and we are forgetting that where we have to invest is in greening cities, in greening spaces, and not talking only about hardware and software. And this is one of the important regulations we have to put into place, is how are we going to regenerate nature? And this is, for me, the most advanced technology we can have. Yeah.
Well, if I can pop in quickly and just ask Daniele, you're hearing all of these different perspectives here. Is it as much of a debate when you bring heads of state, policymakers, businesses together, the UNFCCC, and is it as much of noise, which is why we keep getting stuck and not reaching our targets?
Yeah, thanks. Well, no, the discussion was excellent. I think what is really missing is the sense of urgency translated into action. Really, the window of opportunity is closing, and then we'll end up at the end of the year, say another year of record temperatures, many more extreme weather events, unfortunately many lives lost. And there is not this connection between the reality that the science and the evidence are demonstrating with the political discussions. So a lot of good political will is there. We have seen it also in Glasgow, but it's not really trickling down to the urgency of taking action. So anything that can be done in that space, or solution that can say, okay, this is doable, it's will be accepted and demanded. That's the way. Otherwise, 2030 is really around the corner now. So.
Sharm el-Sheikh, thank you so much. Thank you, Daniele, for this. We had one more question. we reserved some buffer at the end of the session because the team's going crazy back there. Hey, 10 minutes to go, 5 minutes to go. But we take that question and we created some buffer, which you don't know, my team, to have a final round of recommendations, which we'll need in the end, because we want specific results, right, Maitri? Please go ahead, introduce yourself briefly, please. And
right, thanks a lot. My name is Hendrik Platz from the German Aerospace Center. Therefore, I come from research background. And I do have the feeling that very often when we discuss about massive deployment of technologies, it is always the case that they do have some downsides. So they have benefits, but they do have downsides, especially when we talk about massive deployment. And then I end up having the feeling that this whataboutism in these public discussions somehow paralyzes us because we don't know which way to go because they all have, you know, advantages and disadvantages. And I'd like to see what's your take on that. How should we deal with this so we take it into account, but it doesn't jeopardize our progress? Thanks.
One more, so maybe we can combine the two questions and answer them. There was one more at the back, if I saw a raised hand. Yes, very quickly, because we are driving everybody bonkers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shada. I'm a student, and I just finished my A-levels. And it was kind of interesting for me to listen about the fields of the system. So I'm not going to ask a technical question, but a strategically question, how we kind of get to the innovation by involving all the fields of our society. And that's why my question is especially dedicated to Ben, I think.
All right, so we've got two questions, whataboutism and paralysis, and how do we get everyone together? So who wants to take that, the first one, and then the second one? Ben, go first,
Sure,
and then we'll let them think.
I'll kick off. I completely agree with you, and I think when we look at the climate and environmental discourse, there is this sort of kind of ambient disconnect between scientists, between policymakers, between business leaders, between young people as well and civil society, particularly marginalized groups in the global south as well. Part of the idea of systems thinking is to try to bridge that gap. And that's what hopefully, this conference will be able to achieve. But when we look at innovation systems, it's about getting different actors and different stakeholders to work together. That does start within the education system, being able to teach climate sustainability from a less siloed perspective. But it also should be a continual learning process for any leader, whether they're in business or in politics, and a continual engagement with civil society, with other stakeholders, and actively encouraging participation. When it comes to the other question, I can speak from the UK perspective. The UK has delayed its hydrogen strategy until 2026. It was due either earlier this year or last year, and they've now decided to postpone it because they don't want to make a decision yet, which is the current situation. I think when it comes to things like hydrogen versus electrification of heat, for example, these are very difficult questions. And the problem is, as you touched upon earlier, as Eduardo touched upon earlier, we have this issue with longevity, that governments are limited to a 4 or 5 year term and are therefore very reluctant to commit to longer term issues that may result in adverse consequences further down the line, but are also potentially likely to ignore the trade-offs of some of those technologies. And we are therefore in that state of paralysis. I don't necessarily have a good answer to that. I think it starts with probably relying more on scientific research and less on civil servants and bureaucracy. But it's perhaps the biggest challenge that we face toward actually accelerating the deployment of revolutionary technologies to deal with that final 20 or 30% of emissions.
You kind of sum it up. It's like, I will address the first question. It's true, like, if we discuss any technology in the decarbonization, there is so much contentions around it. There are very strong opinions for and against, and it's very difficult to cross that bridge. So the dialogue, the exchange of information, education, probably all those needs to happen. It's really hard to say how, and also to give the hand only to researchers. Then the policymakers are saying that they are the voice of democracy, of the population of their country. So it's really hard, and I don't have answer for it, but I do agree that it's complicated.
Right, thank you so much. Now, Some of those people who have asked these smart questions you'll see again as panelists or moderators during the course of the festival. This session was a relatively abstract session. This is a difficult concept, national innovation systems within the UNFCCC framework, and I think you all managed to answer the questions as specifically and in plain English so people can understand it as possible. Still, we have, even of the buffer time, which is almost coming to an end, we have like a final round, and I'm really asking for short answers, short questions. And this is something you'll hear again throughout the festival, dear audience, which is that if Olaf Scholz or Boris Johnson or whoever is running your respective home country approaches you, or Ursula von der Leyen, if you want to take the European perspective, and says, hey, you have 3 wishes with regards to national innovation systems. What would they be? What can make us better? What can make us quicker? What can make us more flexible? Also because, as we've heard throughout the panel, we don't know which technological solution will be the long-term winner. May I ask Martina you to start?
I will say just one.
I say one.
Systemic innovation is kind of the magic behind all the technology. So unless we talk about business model, regulators, different type of technologies, and also the system operators and so on, we won't really get that far. So systemic innovation should be part of every single policy, regulation, and discussion.
Thank you so much. Who's next? Ben?
Sure. I would say the biggest thing would be to build a participatory model, move beyond this idea of information deficit, close that information gap, and be able to not just engage, but actively involve stakeholders to take part in building solutions and being a part of that change. And I guess I would kind of leave you with 2 questions to think about throughout the next 2 days. Firstly, who is going to be most impacted by climate change? And secondly, who is going to be responsible for the hardest solutions in those hard-to-abate sectors decades from now?
Thank you, Ben. Gentlemen, additional thoughts?
My recommendation will be, first of all, according or related to decentralization, because actually behind technology there is ideology and values. So how can we decentralize technological development at the global scale, let's say, and it is about creating and investing in collaborative ecosystems where these unconventional connections can happen, and start to identify those leaders, those communities that are already working on that, and start to learn from that. Because we don't have time to educate, as I said, all the population, but we can work with the leaders and the innovators that are out there and support those communities globally. This is one recommendation. The second one is invest in nature. Nature is important, even if it is about clean tech innovation, it's hardware and software.
Yeah.
Nature is the most advanced technology.
Thank you. Dietram.
Yeah, so the first point I would say, set ambitious targets, put pressure on the system because time is running out. So the second one is move away barriers which resist removal. We need transformation of systems. We need transformative technologies. Yeah? And the third one is basically finance and costs. Now we have spent a lot of money in Germany on Corona. We spent a lot of money on the war. Now, if we save on climate, I think it's the wrong saving. I think it was an IPC said that because any inaction is more expensive than action, for climate.
What a good final word that is. I have my hat back. Thank you so much. What a good final word, Matthew. I give it over to you, but I would like to mention we've reached the end of buffer time. From here, one logistical add-on. You'll be grabbing some light lunch as you walk out, to be eaten on the way or outside. Please try to be in the next locations on time. It's either the beautiful Remscheid Library or the City Hall you'll be going to, and we're very much looking forward to the follow-up discussions, but I'd like to give to my co-moderator the last words on this session.
This was the most strange thing I've ever done. I've never done a co-moderation, but I'm kind of loving it. I didn't have to do any work. You guys did all the work. He did all the work. They did all the work. But thank you for joining us for this opening session. I hope it was interesting. I hope it's sparked some fires. We're going to continue the conversations. And I will see you in City Hall for the next one.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists.